Welcome to my office here at Heritage Christian University and to another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter. Now, it so happens, as of the time of this recording, that I am beginning a transition. My second contract with Heritage Christian University will run out in about a year at the end of the 25-26 school year. And so my plan is to transition from being president back to being a full-time professor. So we've got a planned transition that is going on. And so I thought it might be an opportune time to talk a little bit about transitions in ministry. And so I hope you'll find some of these things helpful. Now, I do encourage you to not be a constant mover. Don't be constantly thinking about green grass, that's on the other side of the fence or a bigger paycheck, etc. I do find it fascinating that when you look in Matthew and in Luke, when Jesus sent out the 70 and he sent out the 12, he basically told them not to house hop. He said that if someone lets you stay in their home, then don't jump to another home. You can imagine you move into the home of a poor person in town, and then on day 2, you convert the local millionaire, and you're like, hey, I could just move in his mansion. So I want to challenge us, first of all, in ministry, to try to stay at a place, stay and just live in and become a part of the community. But having said that, transitions are going to be a part of ministry and a part of life. I remember a few years ago at one of the gatherings of the Church of Christ presidents, the presidents of the different Church of Christ schools get together once a year to share insight. And at one of those gatherings, we had a presenter who said, the average graduate, and this was probably 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that the average graduate will have 12 to 13 different jobs in their lifetime. So, transitions are going to be a part of life and a part of ministry. So let's just talk about some things related to transitions. First of all, let me just share just a few things as far as if you're the one that's transitioning in, if you're coming to a new congregation. I guess in ministry, I have many times in my local work followed people who had been there a long time. My last full-time work in particular, I was following a preacher who had been there 36 years, and he was staying. So he was going to kind of partially retire. And I remember one friend saying, "What were you thinking?" Another friend described that as ministerial suicide. Why would you, follow a living legend, literally, that everyone loved? And so I think about, I followed a guy who'd been there 8 years, a guy who'd been there 15 years, and a guy who'd been there 36 years, and he was staying. So one of the things I did, so I would just say, as you're making transition, get some advice. I hope this advice helps, but there are also a lot smarter people than me that you interact with that can give you some thoughts. One of the things I did is I sat down with Tom Holland. Brother Holland was my primary homiletics teacher when I was doing my undergrad degree. I had him for preparation and delivery of sermons and expository preaching. I knew that he followed Brother Tucker at Creve Hall, who had been there for many, many years. And so he had been down that road of following somebody who had been a long time at a congregation who was loved. And so I sat down with him one day, actually ran into him during lunch when I was in Henderson for Horizons Leadership Camp, and he was in for a workshop that was going on in the area. And so I just talked to him about what I was thinking about doing and going to a congregation where the minister had been there a long time and was staying. And I said, "How did you and Brother Tucker work it out?" And he said, "We became each other's biggest fans." And he said, when we talked to people, we just bragged on each other to those people. That it's hard for people to be in a fight when the two generals like each other. And I don't remember if he used the word general, but he said basically if you two brag on each other and have each other's back, then others are likely to follow suit. And so in this particular congregation, it was the Graymere Church of Christ in Columbia, and I was following Brother John Vaughn. And I met with the search committee, and they wanted me to then come on a Sunday and preach and meet with some people. Before that happened, I wanted to talk to Brother Vaughn. So I called him. There happened to be a day that I was off. And I said, Brother Vaughn, I'm off this Friday. Can I come over and buy your lunch? And so we went out to eat, and we talked for about an hour and a half. I needed to know how he felt about this transition. I know that often when there are transitions, you will hear things like, it's in a mutual agreement. We mutually are ready for this. Well, often it's more mutual with one than the other. And if he felt uncomfortable, if he felt like he was being mistreated or railroaded after all those years of service, then I needed to know that, because it might influence whether I want to be involved in this situation. I didn't have a long history with him, but I knew of him, and everybody I knew that knew him respected him, and I respected him. And so I needed to know how he felt about things. And so we just had a heart-to-heart talk over lunch, and he couldn't brag enough on the congregation. He couldn't say enough good things about the elders and about Columbia as a community. And he encouraged me to look into it. I'm a younger preacher, and he is an older preacher with years of experience far beyond my experience and wisdom. And it just meant a lot to me. And so I ended up coming and doing my tryout sermon, if you will, and becoming a part of that congregation largely because of that conversation with him. And I'll always be indebted to him. I describe him as a Christian gentleman and Sister Vaughn as a Christian lady. They were amazing and made it easy for Cindy and I and for our family. And so one of the things we did is we just became each other's biggest fans. He went out of his way to say nice things about me. I made sure that he was involved. I needed him to not feel put out to pasture. If you're following somebody that's staying, don't be intimidated by their presence. Okay? There's no place for jealousy and ego in preaching. I've got to have confidence that I can do what God needs me to do with his power, but there's just no place for ego, and that's something we often fight. So what happens when you follow somebody like that is loved, especially if they're going to stay, you just have to be okay with people liking them better than you, and that's okay. In fact, my very first sermon as the preacher at Graymere was, Who Am I? And I talked about who I'm not and who I am. And so I talked about, in fact, everybody on staff had been there for several years, much longer than I. I'm starting, and I'm surrounded by a senior saints minister, and now what was going to be the missions and televangelism minister and the youth minister. They'd all been there longer than me, and anywhere from 6 to 8 years to 36 years. And I said, I'm not them. I wasn't there when your children were born. I didn't perform your wedding ceremonies, and so I can't be John Vaughn. And I'm okay with you loving him. I'm okay with you liking him better than me. That does not offend me at all. All I ask is that you reserve just a little space in your heart for my wife, my kids, and myself. That's all I ask of you. As I talked about what I'm not, in addition to saying I'm not John Vaughn, I said I'm also not the person you come to complain. In other words, if there's somebody on staff that you have a problem with, or you've got a problem with John Vaughn, I need you to go talk to them. Don't come to me about it. If you've got a problem, work it out with them or go talk to the elders. Now, here's why I said that in that sermon, because my experience has been when a new guy comes down, because I've been that new guy who followed someone who'd been there, a while, and what happens is people will try to pull you into camps. Because when somebody's been there a while, there are some happy they left, some who are not happy they left. And so what I would say in those situations, I would say, I wasn't here. I wasn't involved in this. I don't know the details. My encouragement to you, when they sit in my office, I would say, go talk to that person. If you can't work it out, sit down with them and the elders and let y'all work it out. But I just announced, don't come to me. If you're upset with John Vaughn or Carmack Skelton or Rusty Pettis, I am not the guy you need to come to talk about that. you need to talk to them. And so I didn't have any of that. I wish I had said that when I started at earlier churches. And so I just want to emphasize. And so what I would do is then if they said, hey, Kirk, we need you to plan a special Thanksgiving service. One of the first persons I called to help with that was John Vaughn. When they asked me to start a future minister training camp, one of the first persons that first year that I wanted to come and do a class, it's John Vaughn. We needed to value his years of experience. So those are some things I found helpful. I also found when I transitioned to a new congregation place membership, you do not need or want to be viewed as a hired hand. And so the last 2 or 3 works I was at, I placed membership. Me and my family place our membership at this congregation. I'm not here as a hired worker. I'm here as a part of this church who happens to be financially supported so I can spend time doing some preaching and teaching and evangelism that others may not have time to do. But I'm a part of this congregation. So I would encourage you to place membership in the congregation. What I found when I started, 2 keys to fitting in locally or trying to is you focus on having really well-prepared sermons and classes and focus on getting to know people. Don't come in there trying to change a million things. You come in there teaching God's Word, being prepared for every class and every lesson, and spend time with people. Get involved in their lives. Go to the funeral homes. Go to the nursing homes. Go to the hospitals. Go to the ball fields. You live and love into their lives. And if you're busy connecting to people, if you're busy trying to do personal evangelism, and you're busy trying to prepare sermons well, before you know it, they will accept you into their lives and into their congregation. So those are some things that I found helped me to focus on when I was the person that was transitioning in. When it comes to you transitioning out and somebody's following you, I want to challenge you to make it your goal for them to succeed. I want to challenge you when you go out, don't blow up the church on your way out of town. One of the churches I left, a church which I actually have a great relationship with now, I was frustrated. And it really doesn't matter what I was frustrated at, but there were some things that frustrated me. There were even those, someone had come to me and said, we want to start a new congregation. We want you to be our preacher, and we've got the money to support you. And I would have gotten a pay raise. And I said, I don't want to have anything to do with hurting this church. I don't want to have anything to do with dividing this church. And so when I went out of town, I decided I want to leave a strong congregation behind. I'm going to share the positive reasons I'm leaving. I'm not sharing any negative reasons. I told them the truth. I just didn't tell them everything. And I don't know that any scripture teaches me I have to tell you everything that goes through my head. In fact, I get the impression God wants us to be slow to speak, slow to wrath, and quick to listen. And so just remember as you're leaving, now I'm not saying you stand for false doctrine. I wouldn't encourage you to stand for false teaching in any way. But often if there are frustrations, it's usually matters of opinion, personality clashes. Just remember the cause is bigger than the Christian. The cause is bigger than the Christian. Our purpose is bigger than the preacher. So leave that congregation as strong as you can leave it. Don't blow it up on your way out of town. One of the things I would encourage you to do is think about what do I wish I had known when I came in that could have helped me? What is it that I can share with the next person? So as I think about this transition, I know that as of the time of this recording, I don't know when you'll watch it, but as I'm recording it, I'm about 1 year from transitioning out of this office into another office and another role. So one of the things my executive assistant and I have been working on is what do I need to have in place and ready for the next person? So I've got a folder on my desktop or on my laptop says key files for the next president. And then I've got a Google Drive folder that I've shared with my assistant that will be shared with the VPs and will be shared with the next president that has key information. I've started putting information in there. So for example, I've got all the minutes of our cabinet, our administrative council. I've got all the minutes, not only in my time here, But as far back as I had access to them, they're all in one place for the next president. Every presentation, our board meets 3 times a year. The presentations I have made to the board, those PowerPoints, are all in that file. Those are just some samples or examples of what I'm trying to get in place so that I can help that next person. The plan is for that person to be chosen, 4 or 5 months before my last day. Well, my plan is to start including that person in things. I need them to sit in on some administrative council meetings. I need them to go make visits with me. I want them to be involved in the budget process. I need that person to succeed for God's glory. It does not matter if people are glad I'm gone and glad he's coming, okay? It doesn't bother me, and it shouldn't bother me if people are excited and like him better. All that matters is the cause. The cause is bigger than the Christian. The purpose is bigger than the preacher. So I'm thinking, how do I make him to be successful? Because if he struggles and the university struggles, that does not help me. Okay, what matters is what is best for God's kingdom, not what, promotes our egos. When I left my last full-time work, I left the preacher following me, Andrew Phillips. I left him a 4-page document. And it was current responsibilities at Graymere. So here's some things. So I want you to think about, what does that next person need to know? I mean, just simple things like, what have you been preaching the last couple of months? If you've just been preaching through the fruits of the Spirit, and that person doesn't know that, in their first sundry, they start looking at the fruits of the Spirit, then it just puts them off on they're starting on the wrong foot, if you will. I need that person to be successful. So I'm not telling him what I talked about to say, you can't talk about this. I just want him to know, and then he can decide what he wants to talk about. So what I did is I have a preaching section, and I talk about, what I do. I'm breaking down, I do 2 sermons and 2 classes a week. There are different setups at different congregations, but in local work, I always had 2 sermons, a Bible class on Sunday, and then at least a Wednesday night class. And then I've had churches where I did radio programs and ladies' Bible class. I need all of that laid out for the next person and what we did in all of those things. So I laid out, what sermon series I've been working through, the AM sermon series, the PM sermon series, and let them know that. I talked about the yearly themes, and that we usually have yearly themes, and what was the one that we were in the middle of, and how that impacts my sermons. I talked about, the theme for that year was something to believe in, so I want him to know that. I tell him that I try to make sure the elders know what I'm going to talk about at a minimum of 3 months ahead. Okay, often they could know more than that, but I wanted them to know what I planned to preach or do in a class at least 3 months before it happened. I wanted them to know what was coming. I wanted them to be able to speak into that or add to that or share with me things they'd like me to do. I talked about that the members like having a PowerPoint. For example, when I first went to Graymere, I was using PowerPoint some, but I didn't use it with every lesson. Well, what I found out, Graymere had just gotten PowerPoint just before I got there, and it wasn't long till they said, would you use a PowerPoint in all your lessons? And then it wasn't long till they said, hey, could you put printouts? And so now, like if you go to their site, I think, with Andrew's sermons, it not only has the video of his sermon, but I think it actually has the PowerPoint or a PDF of it that you can get on the website. So I just let him know, hey, just an FYI, the members said they would like a PowerPoint with every lesson. And so that's what I started doing. I talked about the classes I do on Sunday night and Wednesday night and which ages and groups I have tended to teach and what I'm working on at this present moment. And so I was teaching what was called a middle-agers class, which is basically everybody from 20 to 80. Okay, you can figure that out, but that was what that class was. And Wednesday night I was teaching the college and young professionals class. I wanted him to know that. That doesn't mean that that's what the elders wanted him to teach. I just wanted him to know what I was doing and what we were talking about. I talked about the 1-minute radio spots that I did for the radio program and talked about how I do that, what program I record that on, etc., etc. I talked about the role I play as co-editor of the bulletin. I talked about the role I play in coordinating monthly staff meetings and how we do those and how we do the calendar process, because when you're in a congregation, A big congregation, you've got a lot of things happening, and you have to be coordinated on your calendar, or you're going to walk all over each other. You're going to have 6 different groups that want the 2 buses on the same day. So I just talk about kind of how we did some of those things. I talked about the role I played in directing the Middle Tennessee Future Ministers Camp. Talked about when the first camp was, and after this person gets there, and the role that this person will probably play in that. I talk about the fact that we have a television program, and that periodically, while Brother Vaughn heads that up, periodically he invites me in to participate in that, kind of some of the things I do with that. Talk about the role I play in being the speech coach for the kids involved in Lads to Leaders. I talk about the role I play with Horizons, and that I take our teenagers with me to Horizons every year. I talk about the Columbia Bible Institute Bible study that meets on Thursday nights, and how sometimes I'm asked to come and be a part of that. We also had a Columbia Bible Institute Preachers Retreat that was headed up by William Woodson and Tom Holland. I talk about the role that I play in assisting them with that. Talk about, sometimes speaking at the Graymere Youth Ministers Retreat. I went through a detailed list of what I do in visitation and my approach to visitation. In this, I highlighted some areas where I didn't think I had done as well, or I had struggled to focus, and that I said, if you'll do this, people are going to love you. There's some things that I didn't do well that I think you could do much better at. I talked about Bible studies and my approach to personal evangelism. I talked about coaching, and that, and what I mean by that is I'm not talking about coaching a local soccer team. I'm talking about counseling. My counseling professors, one in particular, said, don't use the word counselor unless you're a professional counselor. He preferred for us to call it coaching sessions. And so just made him aware that sometimes people are going to want to talk. They're going to want premarital counselor or marriage counseling, and just to be aware of that. Sometimes I played a role in submitting the sayings that go on the front sign, and so I often played a key role in that. So I wanted to make sure he knew about that. And some of the other programs that I was involved in, my role in evangelism team, giveaway day, etc., etc. I even made a list of some of the ministries my wife was involved in, just as an FYI. I then listed every summer series, every yearly theme, every special emphasis Sunday, and just wanted to make sure he understood all of those. I wanted him to know all the classes that I taught. And then at the end, I had our congregational mission statement and our growth objectives. I wanted him to have all of that. So you probably didn't care about several of those things, but I was just trying to give you examples. Think about what you can share with the next person so they can be successful. What matters is the cause of Christ. So what can I do as I'm transitioning in or out to further the cause of Christ? Because the cause is more important than the Christian. I pray that if you need to transition, that those transitions go well and they build churches and glorify God. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Ministry Matters That Matter. And remember, ministry matters because the Master matters. You have a blessed day.